Perfection. So we can go ahead and get started. You know, we try to stay on time as much as the ancestors allow us to. But time is but a construct. So again, thank you all for joining us. We are super excited to have this conversation. This is Black Pacifica in Action, panel discussion hosted by the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Alliance. We have some amazing folks with us and some really juicy questions to dig into and get some more insight on some opinions that might not be super familiar to us across the AAPI umbrella as well as Black community. So in this discussion today, I have three very dear friends who have joined me, and just a little background on this crew of folks. The four of us met once upon a time through the Black Pacific Alliance, which is an organization created for folks that are Black and Pacifica and or Melanesian to come together and discuss what those intersections mean to us and share our experiences with one another. So let's dig into this, and I promise I'm not that nearsighted. But as we look at the bios, let's see. So first up, joining us today, we have Ne Ngatubai, McLean, pronouns she, they. Ne graduated from Oberlin College, where she majored in sociology and minored in Africana studies. She is currently a PhD student and doing a Fulbright Fellowship in Aotearoa, where her work focuses on the storying of queer and or trans Pacifica peoples and where they find love, care, and home in their inter and intra-personal relationships. In her free time, she enjoys reading, binge watching TV shows, playing basketball, and being in community with people she loves and cares for. Thank you so much for joining us, Nay.
Thanks for the invite.
Of course. And let's see, next on the docket, we have Shadelle. Shadelle Ku'uipo, such a good name, Ku'uipo. I have an Auntie Ku'uipo. We love that name in my family. Ku'uipo Hooper is a Black and Pacific Islander. Pronouns are she, her. She was born in Hawthorne, California, and raised in Molokai, Hawaii, and is currently residing in Aloha, Oregon. She is the founder of the BIPOC Youth Hub, formerly known as the Aloha Youth Organization of Oregon. As a single mother of four, she is deeply passionate about mental health, empowering youth, and storytelling through film. Thank you so much for joining us, Shadelle.
Thanks for having me.
Of course. And let's see, last but certainly not least, ooh, technology, y'all. Stay sturdy with me. Perfection. Last but not least, my tab is frozen. We love to see that. The ops are always around. But last but not least, Nia Turner-Keener. Pronouns are she, her, is a Black and Pacifica woman who centers racial equity and intersectionality approaches to improve education and well-being of the communities she belongs to. Currently, Ms. Turner-Keener serves as the Senior Program Analyst for the Racial Equity Committee. Ms. Turner-Keener completed her bachelor's in arts and politics and a minor in urban education. She later received her master's in public policy. We love a master's in public policy. During her education from Mills, she led research and advocacy support, supporting queer, trans, and people of color. And technology has rejoined us. I believe in reading out full bios. And we're back with the rest of the bio. Let's see. She led and co-developed a racial equity program called the Black Wellness Package, BWP, which provided direct initiatives for higher education support systems, such as academics, emotional, and mental health, based on racial-informed trauma. This resulted in undergraduate teaching opportunities at Michigan State University and leading a national presentation for an accepted abstract at the annual American Sociological Association conference. Thank you so much for joining us, Nia.
Thank y'all for having me. Thank you.
Perfection. And just to introduce myself a little bit before we get started, hello, my name is Reggie or Keone Gravely. I am the Director of Advocacy and Organizing here at the National Queer Asian Pacific Islander Association. We are super excited to be able to have this conversation during such a crucial time. A little bit about me. Born and raised in North Carolina, don't play with it. And currently living in Atlanta, Georgia. I am Black and Native Hawaiian, and identify as Mahu. We'll get into a little bit of discussions around gender identity, sexual orientation, and what it looks like in the Pacific. We'll be using some language today that might be unfamiliar to some folks. We sort of use it naturally, rolls off the tongue. So we'll try to pause and make sure that we're defining any terms that might be unfamiliar to folks. But again, if you hear us saying a term that's like, I don't know what that means, and Google is not giving me an answer, feel free to fire it off in the chat, and we'll definitely make sure to follow up on that. But the basis of this conversation is it's Black History Month. As someone that is Black, and February is the month where we get emails to come speak at this, come talk about this. And I wanted to take this opportunity for us to lead that conversation, folks that are Black and Pacific Islander. So definitely wanted to give us the platform to have some of those conversations. This is a newer kind of conversation that we think folks will be exposed to. We'll be talking about the intersections of Blackness, Pacific Islander identity, which throughout the conversation we might refer to as Pacifica, as well as queer and trans and or Pacifica indigenous queer identities. So we'll try to define those throughout the conversation as well. For example, I said I identify as Mahu. Mahu is, I said we'll define it. Colonialism makes things harder to define. Mahu is I think folks would most resonate with like a third gender designation coming from Hawaii. And it is encapsulation of queerness, of transness. There's a lot of different ways that Mahu folk identify as. So it is more of an umbrella of what in the states would be the like LGBTQ plus umbrella. But Mahu is all encompassing, broad definitions, and it fits me just right. So as the moderator, let me start moderating. Period. So again, thank you all for joining us. And let's just tap in. Let's just see where folks are calling from. So where are you calling in from? Tell us a little bit more about yourself that might not have been reflected in the bios that you think is important as we start off this conversation. So I'll toss it over to the person I can see first, which is Nia.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. So my name's Dylan, she, her pronouns. I'm based here in Cali, moved up to Sacramento, but I originally was raised in Santa Cruz, so people are familiar with that area. And then I also have roots in the Bay Area, Oakland, so shout out to Oaktown. Something that I want to share is I love doing artwork. I find that is kind of my reconnection to culture, but also just finding my own peace within that, given the times that we're in right now, and also building community through art and meeting other artists.
Perfection. Thank you so much. And we'll toss it on over to the next person I see. Hair. Shadelle, take us away. Add anything to the intro.
I think you said everything in my intro, but my name is Shadelle. I was born in California, and I moved back to my mom's hometown on Molokai when I was 3 years old. Some of the things that I enjoy doing outside of what already was mentioned is film. I think that's also my way of connecting with both sides of my roots, is just storytelling. And so if anybody's on here watching that is in the film community and documentary, please reach out. I think that would be a fun collaboration.
Perfection. Thank you so much. And last but not least, Nay, let us know.
Hi everyone, I'm Nay, she, they pronouns. My father's side of the family has been in Alabama since 1850s. My mom was born in Tonga, so I'm Black and Tongan, but I was primarily raised in Georgia. I'm calling in from Aotearoa, where I'm doing a Fulbright fellowship. That's about it. I think you said everything else.
Period. And thank you so much, Nay. You are clearly looking at the questions. That gets us into our first question. Where do your people come from? So thank you for modeling that for us, Nay. And we'll toss it on over to Nia and then Shadelle. Talk about your people, who you identify as your people, either specifically or broadly. Where do your folks come from?
Wonderful. For me, roots. Okay, so I'm a transracial adoptee. So for my birth parents, which represent most of my identities, on my Black side, mainly in LA, also Oakland, and we also come from Detroit. And then on my Pacifica side, my birth mom, she was based in Samoa, but now I believe she might be in Tonga. So that's where my roots come from. And also community, I would want to call it just the queer community and the whole diaspora. That's really where I find home and within the intersectionalities of being a person of color in Black and Pacific.
Thank you so much. And Shadelle?
So my dad is from California, and I remember having a conversation with him, and he said that his family originated from Virginia, and they moved over to the West Coast. I know, right? I was like, but my mom, her entire family is from Hawaii, and it's all parts of Hawaii. Oahu, Molokai that's pretty much as far as I know that goes back.
Perfection. Shadelle, we might actually be related. Period. The Black side of my family, my dad is Black, my mom is Hawaiian, my mom is whole side of the family that we can trace back. It's from Oahu, North Shore, from Hau'ula, and my dad's side of the family is from Virginia. So if you have any folks over there in the Martinsville area, we might be kin. So that's where the Southern accent comes from. So if y'all hear that come out throughout the live, ancestors. Don't know what to tell you. Okay. Period. Let's dive into some questions. So we're talking about many an intersection in this conversation. And I think initially, let's just start off with one of the, I guess, more basic questions of what does being both Black and Pacifica or Pacific Islander mean to you personally? It's not an experience we get to hear about too much. So let's just go ahead and start off with that. And we'll do reverse order this time, starting off a lot with Nia already. So we'll start off with Nay.
I think I was thinking about this question when I read it. And it's funny because when we were going over the questions, Kiona, you kind of said what I was going to say, which is that for me, when I think about being both Black and Pacific Islander, it is like recognizing that I kind of am like the embodiment of the people that were here before me. And so for Pacific Island, like being Pacifica and being part of the community, recognizing that I'm part of a lineage just like some of the greatest voyagers this world has ever seen. And on my Black side of the family, part of like a lineage and community of some of the like most resilient and innovative and creative people that this world has seen. And so in recognizing that I am both of those things, I like just think of myself as just a powerful person, and in knowing that I hold kind of like their past, presence, and futures within me. And so, yeah.
Poetry. Poetry. I love it. And Nia, Shadelle, either of you?
Poetry. I have to follow up with that. I think it means strength and perseverance, and not in the sense of we always have to be the ones that are strong. We always have to be the one that's persevering. It just means that in our DNA, it's just natural that we know that we're going to get through it. So
I would piggyback off of those points. But like similar to like Shadelle, like we are strong, but we don't necessarily have to be strong. But that is something that's naturally that comes to both sides of our diasporas. I also think just the acknowledgement that we've always been here and just my existence and even just talking with y'all is an act of resistance and is an act of love. So taking pride in both of that.
Well, this is a good collective of people, y'all. This is a good collective. All right, let's see. Let's build off of that a little bit because very rarely do we get to hear stories about folks that are Black and Pacific Islander. There are a lot of stereotypes that come up for either group, but folks don't tend to have a good conception of what being both could look like or could mean for communities. So, and this is open to whomever, so feel free to hop in. But let's talk about some challenges in being either recognized as Black and Pacific Islanders within community. Have you ever had struggles or challenges with just being recognized as Black and Pacific Islander?
I'll take that about that. As a transracial adoptee, and shout out to the adoptees and domestic and international, yes. I think just that ongoing just finding space and also making space for yourself where you are represented and you are seen and really trying to get in touch with community. But it has been a challenge. I think even growing up for me, just in a predominantly white town where the population was 0.5% Black, it was hard just to be seen as a Black individual. But then growing up, no one was familiar with other parts of the Pacific or parts of Oceania. So even if I were to share a bit of more of who I was, there was a connection automatically to Hawaii. And at a certain point, it just became too tiring for me to just keep explaining, like reiterating, and mainly just educating and informing. So I would mainly just say yes, but it's different to just keep explaining. And then I think mainly entering to the Bay Area and finding more community amongst Black people in the pan-Black diaspora, but also again finding community within Pacifica in the Bay Area as a great hub specifically has been really endearing. But again, it's just been, it still is an ongoing journey to navigate.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing. Adele or Nay, anything?
I think growing up in Hawaii, and I lived on one of the smaller islands, population was probably like 9,000 when I was there. There was just a handful of Black people, so there wasn't really room to understand the Black side of our family, and the Black side of my identity. So I lean more towards Pacific Islander. And so when I moved outside of that space, it was almost like a culture shock to see the things that are happening to the African American experience in America, because you just didn't see those things inside because the Blackness was almost invisible in our community. How did I navigate that? I think, like Nia said, we're still trying to navigate that. However, I'm always speaking loudly about injustices, no matter what spaces I'm in. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah, I think I'm the opposite of Shadelle. Whereas, like, I grew up in Georgia, and where I grew up, people aren't familiar with Pacifica communities, and so I was always just like read as Black, and also how I related to my identity, just kind of related more to my Blackness because I was in such strong Black communities. So I don't think I've ever had challenges when it comes to like Black communities and my Pacific identities. But when it comes to my Pacifica communities and being in those spaces, that becomes a lot different. Mainly because I find that a lot of Pacifica communities really lean into the categorization of like Polynesia, Melanesia, and Micronesia, and even thinking about historically where those categories come from. Like Polynesian people were named that way, and thinking about like copper colored like skin tones just being more fair in comparison to Melanesian people who are named because of Black people and Black like the Black people that were there, quote unquote, or racialized Black people that were there. So whenever people find out that I'm Tongan, it kind of becomes this weird thing where my Blackness kind of erases my ability to be seen or to be Tongan because I am darker in color. And so if I'm, especially when I'm in the Pacific, I'm always read as being Fijian or somewhere in Melanesia. And so it becomes this thing where I'm like, oh no, I'm Tongan. And they're like, oh, hafekasi, like you're only half. It's said in a way that makes me feel as if I cannot be Tongan because I am darker. And so yeah, I've faced I usually typically get a lot of comments about that when I'm in Pacific communities where I'm not read a certain way because of how I appear, which it becomes a bit annoying. And I think how I've learned to challenge that or navigate that is just knowing myself and like leaning more so into like, no matter how others perceive me, they can't take away my lineage and who my ancestors are. And that just got to stand on it, I guess.
Period. I love that. And I'm hearing some through lines for sure. And definitely for me, myself, being Black and Hawaiian, and being lighter skinned. Like my brother and I don't have the same complexion, so that, colorism also, there are like some waves of that. I think in how both my brother and I are received. I grew up with the Black side of my family in North Carolina. So I did not grow up with my family in Hawaii, but I always find it so interesting when I go home and visit that side of the family. It's most of in Hawaii, like Hapa, like there's a lot of mixed kids, a lot of mixed families in Hawaii, but there's a classification almost, and this is sort of true across like multiracial communities. Is like, what is that mix though? And I always have sort of found when the mix includes Black and some other racial or ethnic group, that there's always a deep history there and very like intricate nuances that like have to be unworked or undone. But let me Box, we got more questions to dive into. But I think building off of that point where, I mean, we at points may have felt like we've had to choose based off of the side of the family we might have grown up with, or the areas that we were in, or the specific cultures we had immediate exposure to. But I've always been Black and Hawaiian. I've never not felt Black and Hawaiian, and I think that's fairly similar. So I want to ask about, we talked about, some challenges, some negatives. Can you recall a time where you may have felt affirmed in both identities? I thought, main character energy. Growing up, I was like, I am the only Black and Pacific Islander because I can't find any others in North Carolina. I am the one. And then met like an amazing collective of people and was like, I'm not alone. So I'm wondering if y'all have similar insights.
I'll answer that. And I think before I talk about how I received that affirmation, I will talk about how I got the affirmation, which was during meeting BPA, which is the group that we all kind of met in. And this was an organization that kind of came together during the George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. And it was such a powerful movement and participation that we started seeing all kinds of communities coming together for it. But then questions started circulating around about the hashtag and the group Pacific Islanders for Black Lives Matter. And so I think the questions were asking how genuine were some of these relationships towards justice? Were they there to actually support, or were they there because the movement was so big? And we know how trends go, right? Like it's there one day and then the next day nobody's doing anything to push it forward. So that opened up a deeper conversation and what formed Black Pacific Alliance, which is it's essential to remind our Pacific Islander families and friends and community that anti-Blackness is not something that's within our relationships. It never was there. It was something that was brought to us and taught to us. It wasn't something that we did with each other. And so when we first just got on a call in 2020 and saw everyone's faces like now, I was like, am I related to like this? Because I was the only one besides like my siblings, and I might have known a few other people, but it wasn't the group that we have now was just so affirming to me, especially when we all met up in Oahu this past summer. I was like, I almost started singing the song Twin. But it was that moment for that moment of affirmation that yes, we are here, yes, we're not invisible. And I think it's important to remind communities that we're more stronger together than separated.
I agree with that. When I first entered BPA, I love your energy, Keone. For me, it was more so like isolating and be like, I'm alone. Like, oh, Black sheep of the family, like literally, because none of my siblings are also Black and Pacifica. But entering to BPA and like seeing Shadelle, seeing you, seeing Nay, and everybody else in that space, it got very emotional for me because this was the first time where I felt not only represented and affirmed, but felt connected without even knowing any of the people yet in this space. And then being able to, like Shadelle said, to meet up in person finally for like Pack Fest and just collectively share in experiences and share our own stories and share more storytelling and just connecting was very much helpful for me, and not only my confidence in all of my identities, but also just finding, in a sense, another extension of family. Because for so long it was hard growing up like in a town where there's no Black people, and then going to the Bay and being welcomed, but then also still trying to find those connections. It's an ongoing journey, but I'm very fulfilled and very glad that I met all of you and even BPA. So that's where my affirm.
I love that. And yet, when we all first met, I was like, "Oh, we all look very similar. We all look very, very similar." But really enjoyed meeting everyone because, like, growing up, of like all of my cousins, I can't really think of any that are both Black and Hawaiian. Like most of my Hawaiian cousins are like white and Hawaiian, Mexican and Hawaiian, Puerto Rican and Hawaiian. And me and my brother are the only Black and Hawaiian ones, and we were just received differently. It might not have been explicit, in a lot of instances. In some instances, it outright was like, "Oh, don't worry, you don't look Black," type stuff. So, I mean, we have so much more, and I think we have so much more to unpack, particularly around like anti-Blackness in the Pacific and like such a resistance to like actually talk about it, at least from the Hawaiian perspective, the like Aloha spirit, like we're all a community, like we don't feel any differently about Black folks. And I'm like, but y'all it don't get that, because what did you say at the cookout? So we have a lot to unpack throughout the Pacific, definitely, around anti-Blackness. And just to move us on to another topic as well, because we hold multitudes, folks. And I just want to ask sort of how this is the National Queer Asian and Pacific Islander Alliance. So we're going to shift into some more expansive conversation around gender identity and sexual orientation as well. So I am interested to know more about how your cultural backgrounds, being both Black and Pacifica, have influenced your views on gender and or sexuality.
I was gonna see your Nia wanted to take it first.
I was ready to see.
PhD track. If you yeah.
Oh, you want me? Okay, I'll go. Yeah, I think because sometimes I think about this in my work. I often revisit like two scholars in particular, Ocean Vuong and Ashan Crawley, who both talk about how queerness has in many ways shown them alternative ways of loving and caring for people, and think about how thinking about queerness as one part of our sexuality, but also as it is how we relate to the world. And so I think in many ways I agree with that. Being queer has kind of forced me to think about love and care outside of heteronormative norms that we've been socialized into. And I think about that as well as my Blackness, because when we talk about Black people and some of the most marginalized people, especially in the US, but globally, like there has to be an alternative way of loving and caring and showing up that goes beyond like I guess systems of oppression. And so I think about how in the most loved I've felt were usually by like Black women in my case, outside of my mother. And so I see those two as relating, especially my Blackness and queerness, as relating to teaching me so many different ways to be in loving and caring relationships. I think I'm still navigating that when it comes to my Pacific identity. Also, like saying for my specific experience, like my family is Mormon. And so that is a whole nother thing when it comes to how I relate to Pacific communities, especially my Tongan community, because usually most of the gatherings are church based. And so when having to be in church spaces where like the church has said that they do not believe in queerness or gender diversity, that becomes a little bit harder to navigate. And so, yeah.
I agree with Nay. I think also what's been interesting for me is just that concept of fluidity. I've been seeing it like very much so on Pacifica community spaces. I think also to acknowledge what Nay's saying, some of the religious ties makes it sometimes challenging to get that connection or even let alone acceptance. Personally, for me, I believe most of my family accepts me. On my Tongan side, my uncle, his sister, she's lesbian, and that was something that was accepted with them on their side. On my Samoan side, I know my aunties like accept me for who I am, but I'm also still connecting to family. So that is a question in terms of how open do I be, and also just keeping in mind like protecting my peace as well. For me, I identify as pan slash like queer, and also recognizing that there's still some unlearning that I have to do just as a cis person, as what Nate's talking about with like cis heteronormativity and how really enriched that has been in colonial impact in both spaces. Fortunately for me, I've also found acceptance and love amongst like mainly like Black women or other Black queer people in general, and how that's really changed not only my approaches to just building community but also showing up with support. Even looking at historical movements and seeing how a lot of them were actually led or planted seeds by Black trans people is something that I'm also trying to keep in mind when building racial equity work in my job. But really that power fluidity, and even that is like saying goodbye to colonialism and tapping into who we are.
I love that fluidity, like the ocean. I when I introed myself a little bit, I talked about being mahu, and I think Shadelle also touched on this point too. There's obviously such a long history with both Christianity and the military in the Pacific through colonialism, and surprise, colonialism, the culprit. But throughout the Pacific, for centuries, there have been I don't want to say alternative because that sounds, edgy, but there have been other indigenous like gender identity, sexual orientations, just historically that were revered positions in society. They were caretakers, caregivers, teachers, instructors of hula, played very integral spiritual roles throughout the Pacific, specifically in Hawaii, Mahu. The introduction of both Christianity and the military, there has been such a big pivot away from traditional gender identities and sexual orientations, and really like to the point where like stop playing with me, auntie and uncle. Like if we were in front of like and not even ancestors from like 1,000 years ago, like 100, 200 years ago, folks that like we have photographs of, if we were with them, they would be thinking you're weird for not accepting mahu, for example. It is, for me, it is so un-Hawaiian to like not like Mahu, to like think Mahu or this like abomination um uh, via Christianity. So soapbox, soapbox, soapbox. But I really appreciated the opportunity to like dig deeper into like more traditional Pacifica gender identities and sexual orientation, because the like LGBTQIA plus like acronym, like I never felt pulled to, or actually I felt pulled by too many. I was like, what do I select? I was like, I feel like it the worst for me personally. I was like, so much segments that like don't really just like hit deep for me. I don't feel called to any of these specifically, and it depends on the day. But Mapu, I was like, great. I love a good umbrella for me, and I also do want to affirm like folks do find a lot of affirmation and like having the larger acronym to like be able to pinpoint exactly how they're feeling. But for me, I was like this like more Western concept. It's not, I don't want to be so specific with it because everything changes day to day. So for me, Mahu was, she was the one, and here we are. And for folks watching either now or later, I really encourage folks to look up the term MVPFAFF plus. That's MVP FAF. And it is a it is a collection of queer and or trans identities across the Pacific. I think the most easy way to like connect would be like the LGBTQ plus of the Pacific. But every letter represents a different nation's concept for a queer and or trans identity. So within the islands, folks use MVP FAF quite a bit, and then here in the States, the acronym QTPI. We really lucked out on that acronym, QTPI. So queer, trans, Pacific Islander is also used if folks hear those interchangeably. And hopping off of my soapbox and back into these questions, let's keep it rolling. So thank you so much, Nay and Nia and Shadelle. I want to toss a question over your way. As someone that doesn't identify as LGBTQ but has family members, has deep community that are within the LGBTQ plus community, how have you seen gender and sexuality discussed within Black and Pacifica communities, and what do you feel your role is?
So I think there's two sides of views, right? There's a side where I grew up where everyone's accepted. Mahus is something that was normal where I grew up. So it wasn't, again, until I moved to the States where I saw, big signs saying, if you're this and you're that, you're going to hell and all this kind of stuff. And that was really confusing to me, especially if you consider yourself a Christian. There's no room for hate. I don't think so. It's almost like you don't have to agree with somebody does. You don't have to follow suit, but you do have to have respect for humans. And that was the conversations that I was having in my communities with both Pacific Islanders and Black. There wasn't any like a massive amount of hate, and it wasn't a thing either. Like it was almost like we're all a part of the same community. And my role is just to pretty much treat people like human beings.
Period. We love to see it. Ally, shout out. Period. And I think I love that experience too, because for me, as someone Hawaiian as well, it is such a departure, I think, from my familial experience. From some of my Hanai family. Hanai is like a like kind of like adopted, but I don't like to use the term adopted, but in Hawaii, like Hanai family is like an adopted family, I guess. But for some of my like older cousins, fully cut off. They would be what we would consider lesbians, fully cut off from family, kicked out. So, like the family that like has a very Western concept of it. So I think what I'd like to highlight is there's such a range in the Pacific. Folks that still carry some of that like traditional respect and conceptions around gender identity and sexual orientation. And then some of my family, that's like military, Christian, pastor, military. They have come around so much in like the last 20 years, but still a lot of families, particularly in Hawaii, hold a lot of those sentiments. Period. And thank you for dropping that in the chat. MVPFAFF plus, folks. And let's continue on. We have been at it for almost 45 minutes. So let's keep it rolling, y'all. Let's see. So we've talked about Blackness, Pacific Islander identity. We've talked about some queerness, transness that creates us as we are. And I think one point I want to bring up is that we talk about anti-Blackness a lot. At least we do. I don't hear the conversation too much when ain't no Black folk in the room with other communities of color, and I'd like to have that conversation more. But I think we talk a lot about anti-Blackness specifically in AA or PI communities. But I want to ask if y'all have experienced the opposite. Like, have you heard anti-Pacifica rhetoric in Black communities, and why if you have, or why not, and why do you think that might be?
I'll take a stab at this. I kind of shared before, I wouldn't label it as anti-Pacifica, but in general, mainly when I have been in Black spaces or just seen both of my communities in one space, has been a general acceptance, love, especially in like social activism and advocacy spaces. But sometimes when it comes to being a Black setting, maybe at like a concert, and we're all sounding off in our community doing the chehu, I have gotten comments about, now's not the time for that. So I guess I would label that maybe as like a little push. But I also wonder if that's also because maybe like a lack of understanding of our intention and why we're doing that. I may understand that the impact might be, oh, it's loud, but also that's rhetoric that we've heard in the Black community. So I wouldn't say necessarily anti-Pacifica rhetoric. For the most part, it's just been all around like love and acceptance. But yeah, sometimes there is a little bit of tug of war in some moments.
I don't think I've ever had an anti-Pacific conversation in a Black setting. I've had a lot of anti-Blackness in Pacific settings. And a lot of the times when I have conversations, I feel like my Black spaces is more open to learning about Hawaiian culture or Pacific Islander culture than Pacific Islanders is more open to learning about the Black experience. And I'm not sure why that is. I'm wanting to say because of just the views that colonization has had on Black people that are kind of like considered the lowest on the totem pole. And it's that idea that we have to kind of remove from the conversation. But yeah, I've never had a conversation anti-Pacific. It sounds almost weird to say because it's not it's not something that I've really heard of.
As I wrote it, it sounded weird for me to type. I've literally, and I grew up in Black spaces, I literally never experienced like anti-Pacifica rhetoric or like that I do like just easily off the cuff walking down the street in Hawaii or something. Like the anti-Blackness is so it's just sitting there waiting to come on out. But as I was typing the question, I was like, this feels weird to even write. Like I have never even experienced this in Black spaces. I have, as a Pacific Islander, experienced like folks fetishizing like Pacific Islanders, like come over here and hula, like do a little moment for me. But that as I was like thinking about my Pacific identity, I was like, I don't think I've ever actually faced like anti-Pacifica, especially in Black spaces. Never faced any anti-Pacifica rhetoric. But I wrote the question I was like, I want to see if other folks have like, because I've never even, I don't know if I've heard of this. So definitely wanted to put that question out. And Nay, I wanted to see if you had a response to this question.
Yeah, I was gonna agree. I haven't faced similar, like anti-Pacific rhetoric, similarly as I've experienced anti-Blackness in Pacifica spaces. Also, because I think there's just a lot of unknowing about Pacifica communities for Black communities, and like the point of reference for a long time was like The Rock. So it's like, and like Troy Polamalu. And so it's like, there's not much, I think if I talk about it, there's just more like questions that they have, but it's not necessarily, yeah, it's not in the same rhetoric. I think the only thing that I started thinking about when Nia was talking was that because I think there's just a lot of unknowing, and sometimes like I see that coming out, especially if I'm like on social media and there's like videos of like indigenous Fijian people, or like even in Moana, I remember coming across a lot of conversations because at the end of the movie, Moana 2, at the end of the movie, there is someone with darker complexion that comes out or that is shown. And there automatically becomes, I guess, the conversation, especially more so coming from like Black Americans, that's like, oh, see, we're everywhere. And that's where I'm like, oh, like, because when I say I'm Black, I like, you know what I mean? Like, I refer to that sometimes too as like ethnically, just because I don't know where that comes from past Alabama in 1850s. And when we think of like what has been labeled as Melanesians or Blackness in the Pacific, there's like a racialized Blackness, which is the same for the US, but it's also different. And so I think when we get into those conversations, I'm like, oh, but they are still the indigenous people of that place. And so that like is kind of different. And I think sometimes that becomes a blurry conversation when having, and in a way that I've seen where people are like, oh no, these people are Fijian. It's like, oh, well, don't erase their Blackness. I'm like, but it's different. Like, it's very different. And so that's like the only types of conversations that I've seen. But again, kind of very different from conversations I'm having in Pacific communities.
Definitely, and that's also very our Americanness. When I
Yeah.
lived in the Pacific for a couple years and stuff, I am Black and I am Hawaiian, and I would see folks that as an American I would racialize as Black because in the States you would be racialized as Black, and folks would be like, "I'm not Black, I'm Fijian," or like would identify more with like their nationality or their specific indigenous group within that nation. And so I really discovered living out of the country that like, oh, or like the American concept of like how we can racialize folks when we leave the country. And I was like, I am actually not going to ascribe Blackness to folks that don't seek it,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would otherwise in the States be racialized as Black. Who am I to
Outside
give
of
you the title if you don't want
yeah.
it? All right, Kira, and we're chugging along. We are chugging along. Let's see. Thank you for those that have been in it to win it so far. Thank y'all for sticking with us. We got a couple more questions to go, and then I'm gonna release y'all on this Friday, because it's Friday. But let's see. I'm gonna skip around just a smidge. Let's see. So we talked about Blackness. We talked about Pacific Islander identity. We've talked about queerness, transness, a little colonialism. We talked about anti-Blackness. We talked about anti-Pacifica rhetoric in Black communities maybe not existing. Let's figure that out. We'll figure that out. But I'm wondering in this moment, particularly for LGBTQ plus folks, how can Black and Pacifica community that identify as like cisgender heterosexual show up differently or show up better for community members that share racial or ethnic backgrounds but identify as LGBTQ plus? That was a little bit of a mouthful. Let me know.
I think though I did take a little bit of notes on that. Part of it is like make space and leadership and streamline that process and professionalism, or even just any spaces where there are members of our community, and also just sit down. Don't tokenize us in a way when it's like, oh, it's Pride Week, where it's just performed. If you're really wanting to be intentional and impactful, have those both things be parallel with each other and go in the same direction. But just creating more streamlined process so that we are represented and not in a way that's just artificial.
Kiana, I think you touched on this earlier, which is I would say just start to be critical when y'all entering in these religious spaces that try telling you that queer and or trans people are a new concept and have not been around and been socializing your kids. Because I think like we have to really just be honest that especially conservative forms of Christianity are used as colonial tools, and the people who are a part of those become like using that to carry out colonial missions. And so for me, it's just like really taking a critical look at what you were being taught. Also understanding history, because like being homophobic does not stop queer and or trans people from existing. In fact, people have always been here. And so I think just knowing that and just really just being critical of what you're taking in, because what we see across the board is like homophobia. Their reasoning for homophobia, they'll always point to the Bible, give you a verse about how men should not be sleeping with men, etc. And so I think just being cautious of how you are being weaponized and what you're being taught.
I also want to back off of that, but also like calling in and calling out when there are instances of harm and not leaving it on the individual who is facing those impacts of oppression to do it, whether they're in the space or not. Same with any Black individual, because that's also demonstrating, hopefully, your unlearning and relearning in that moment. But again, just not making the responsibility on that other.
Okay, I wanted to say something on that, if I may. It just reminded me of this quote that says, when there's too much space in between, lean in. You can't really understand someone's background and, you know, their lifestyle if you don't actually lean in to understand them, and not lean in to take over. Like Nay said, like sometimes you have to just sit down and listen. One of the things that we talked about earlier this week is I sent a message like, okay, is this panel about Black Pacifica or is it Black Pacifica trans? Because if it is, that I want somebody in this space that might be able to talk and have more experience with it. And and our lovely host here said, no, it's a conversation for all. And I think sometimes when we try to lean into someone's space, we have in our mind what we should do, when really we should be asking, how can I support you here?
And thank you so much for that, Shadelle, because Shadelle hit me up and said, is this, you know, is
I was
this
like, is this a conversation
okay?
for me or
And
no?
I'm of the mindset, especially like Black and Pacifica, like the come in, we need people to have this kind of conversation. If not, it's just me, Nay, and Nia all agreeing with each other, all, having similar strategies for how we get our cishet relatives or loved ones to sort of reframe how they're thinking. So it's definitely a necessary part of the conversation and not taking up too much space. And you haven't done it at all. We love Ally. Thank you for being here. Period. But as we truck on just a little bit, actually, I'm moderating, but let me throw in a 1-2. Colonization has really done something globally, for sure. In the Pacific, it has moved so swiftly that in a 1.5 century across the Pacific, people have completely forgotten about queer and trans identity throughout the Pacific. Now think it's an abomination when their grandparents or great grandparents certainly would have thought differently. The languages are being erased. The U.S. military is everywhere in the Pacific and really has played upon, I think, some of the indigenous ways of being that our ancestors undertook. The spirituality, traditional Pacific Islander spirituality, replaced with Christianity. The U.S. military complex sort of replaced this like warrior mentality throughout the Pacific. So I certainly agree that like sitting down with our relatives and not having that conversation about U.S. Colonialism, because that will not get us anywhere in initial conversation, but having that, framing the conversation. If I sit down with my auntie and I'm like 147 years ago, no. Like, come on, we're not gonna, no. But if I sit down with my auntie and be like, look, do you love me? I know you do. Less is talking person to person and being like, girl, you helped raise me. Like, what? I am no different. When I was swishing in a diaper, the swish still swishes. So like, what is this in you that is preventing you from loving me fully? So I think that having those kind of conversations, at least in my family, has been like super helpful. And then at the full family gathering, I show up and hop on the table and I'm like, colonialism has destroyed our. So it's a both and. It's certainly a both and. But perfection. Let's see, just a couple more questions. Y'all know I like to talk too much. But let's see. As I stated in the beginning, Black History Month, and we Black. So what's up? But I think what's important to ask in this moment is during this Black History Month and certainly beyond, because this conversation tends to take place in February, particularly in non-Black communities. A lot of interest, a lot of focus is sort of placed on Black folks to come together and have these conversations during February. I invite us to continue conversations before and after February throughout the end of time. But I think what is important for you, what is needed for you from Asian and Pacific Islander communities in this moment, being both Black and Pacifica.
I'll be short. Just buy from Black stores, communities, small businesses, support them and them only, because at the end of the day, it really is about creating our own businesses so that we can thrive, especially when we're competing with a bigger, I had a brain fart, but I'll just keep it sweet. Just buy from Black businesses this month and every month if you want.
I agree with Shadelle. Also, I think just incorporating some sense of Black equity into like your culture, into like, and when I mean by culture, like also like your main like work culture and like your interpersonal understanding. And when I say equity, like I really mean the full encompassing of that. So like buying, forming more streamlined forms of representation, professionalism, not necessarily just throwing the rope back or calling out in February, like Shadelle said, like we're Black all day, every day. So show up, show out.
Yeah, I agree with what's being said, and I think just taking some time to understand and learn how anti-Blackness is showing up in spaces and checking it and holding each other accountable for when it does show up, because I think it feels odd to me when we have this category of like island reggae. Okay, where does that come from? If not from Black people, I see Pacifica folks walking around with Black hairstyles. I see them saying the N word and then fighting me on it when I tell them they cannot say it. And then I go into conversations and then I hear Pacifica people talking about how someone's beautiful because they're more fair or and so I think like recognizing that colorism that is in our communities is rooted in anti-Blackness, and that a lot of what happens in our Pacific communities, or a lot of the things that I see in our Pacific communities, are deeply influenced by Black culture. And so it feels weird that that exists, and yet you can't show up for Black people. You can't check your family members when they're being anti-Black. And so I think there just has to be a recognition about how Black culture has influenced more modern mainstream cultures, but anti-Blackness is still so prevalent. And so I think doing all the things that were mentioned and just holding each other accountable for when it shows up.
And also recognizing your own internalized racism, specifically within the Asian diaspora, like within anti-Blackness, but also like even like with East Asian specifically, like understand like Negritos were a thing, and there are Black people who, whether are mixed or have ancestry related to your diaspora too, that is melanated. So understand that as well.
Kiriato. And I think first things first, call out your cousin if you're looking for a step, or just one step. I've hosted many a session on anti-blackness for Asian groups, for Pacific Islander groups, and folks hit me with the give us a guide. I'm just a person. Like they're like, give us the like step 1 to 100 for me to reach anti-blackness. Why is it? Wait, I said let's have a conversation. How did it become my job now? So I think ask yourself first, and then ask for support. If you haven't even called out your cousin, you know the one. You know the one that lives in California, that has really adopted some gangster
You
culture,
be dropping
running
the
around saying the
N-word?
N word, dropping the N word like it's the flavor of
What's
the
the
day. Start
Corn.
there. Right. Let's start there. It starts with learning. It starts by calling out the people closest to us, and then we can work on that 100 step guide.
Mhm.
So see, and I see I'm getting the notification of like, Reggie, it's been an hour, and it's been a good hour. But let's see. Let's round off when with one last question, and then we'll sort of close out for the evening. So it's Black History Month, as I said. What's your favorite part about being black? Go ahead.
We are we are the culture. Like anything and everything, almost practically feels like everything you trace back to us, and with that, give us credit.
That was my answer.
Period. Period. Nay, do you have an answer?
I mean, that's it. Yeah, I love being black. I choose it again in 100 lifetimes. So yeah.
Curiosity. I love it. My favorite thing about being black is my grandma. Shout out to Livonia and all the Livonias out there. I love my grandma. It's the sense of community. It's the
Mhm.
food, especially in the South. We love it. But love, love, love the community. Love the culture. Love it. It just gives what it needs to every single day and every single minute. Stop playing with it. But let me not do too much. But period. But perfection, I want to close this laptop because it's a Friday evening. And I want to thank all three of you, Nay, Shadelle, and Nia, for joining us and starting. This is but the beginning of a conversation, really to introduce some topics to folks that may have not come across those topics before. And not just because it's Black History Month, but that is an added bonus. But to initiate these sort of conversations for folks to take back to their circles, chew on some new ideas, come up with some new questions, and then as a collective, we have a huge umbrella to come together and figure out how we can like build together, build in new ways. Because these folks is coming, these folks is coming for us all. Let's get the house in order, and then let's get the neighborhood in order. But I want to thank you all for joining us. Do you have the three of you? Do you have any departing words?
I do. Real quickly, if you guys have not followed Black Pacific Alliance, they're on Instagram and fan base. If you're Black, you should be on fan base, but follow them on Instagram. And speaking of Black businesses, go buy some earrings from my sister, Hiva Inspirations. She's a Black Pacific Islander owned. And yeah, thank you guys for having me. It was such a good conversation. And I hope that we have a bigger conversation because I think it's important.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for inviting me to this conversation. And especially if you're in the U.S., I mean, whatever happens in the U.S. kind of will impact things globally. But recognizing that we have more insane, we have more similar than we are different. And so what does impact Black communities, when you vote against the interests of Black communities, you are inherently going to be voting against the interests of yourself in in Pacifica communities, in Asian communities. And so recognizing that the way through this is in solidarity, and we are more similar than we are different, and that, but first we really do have to unlearn this anti-Blackness. And so, yeah, just thank you for this conversation.
And Nia?
Like art, if you want to buy some acrylic art, you can follow my art account, Insta Nia's Art Team. I also have my Etsy link in there as well. And just remember, kind of piggybacking off what Nay said, that in order to get your liberation that falls within Black liberation. If you don't believe me, look at the history books.
Auto, and also keeping my NQAPIA hat on. Who would I be if I didn't plug our events? So again, thank you for joining this Black Pacifica in Action discussion. We hope for it to continue in the future. Additionally, if you are in the U.S. South and you are interested in joining together with AAPI community throughout the South, we are having our Southern Regional Convening March 26th to the 29th. Check out our page for the registration info. We just extended our proposal deadline another week. So if you're interested in attending or submitting for a session, you got it. You got 1 week left, y'all. Go ahead and get in there. We will be hosting the convening in Dallas, Texas. It should be a very interesting time. We'll be talking about the intersections of immigration, LGBTQ plus identity, mental health, youth and education, and many other topics that impact the LGBTQ plus and ANHPI communities. So again, hit our link tree in our bio, and you will also see all of the other good events that I should be plugging right now, but I already plugged one. So thank you all so much for joining us. I hope you have a good rest of your evening. Bye, y'all. Happy Black History Month.
Bye.
Bye.